and welcome to a new video. And today we will talk again, like so often, about the Romans. Well, specifically we talk about the Romans and their laws for building. Today, building a house in many countries isn't that easy, especially if we look at the whole paperwork we have to do, all the planning, and if we want to do changes in a house, we also have to first go to the local government and ask them if this is okay for permission, etc. So there's a whole lot of work before you can actually build a house. But was it in the Roman times as well? Well, I will talk here about the city of Rome during the Roman Empire, for example. And it was absolutely like this, that there were many laws you had to look at when building houses. Well, why was that though? Why did they implement laws on building houses? Well, it's like today. The housing sector was actually kind of a business area where people tried to build fast and cheap houses and rent them out for huge sums, which was possible because Rome was basically the center of the Roman world. Following, they decided we need some laws because the houses got unstable, etc., and just built way too fast. So often houses crashed, people died, and this was not good for Rome. So they implemented laws, for example, laws that described which stones, etc., you could use for building your house. There was also banned stones you were not allowed to use, and this really helped the structures of the houses. Also, there was an interesting restriction because often when we think of Rome, we think like huge temples, etc. But that's not for the houses the case because they were limited. They were limited in height. This was because too high houses often were more likely to break apart. And also, we have the interesting thing that rich people in the Roman Empire mostly lived like at the first level. Today, if we think of penthouses, etc., the most expensive apartments are in the highest levels. But in the Roman Empire, it was actually like this, that the most expensive ones were on the first one. Why was this though? Well, because of fire. When you were in the first level, you could run the fastest out of the house. If you were on the highest level, you had the problem when, for example, the fire broke out at the second level, you were not able to go out. You were probably to die. So that was one of the reasons why really the richest people lived on the first level and the poorest people lived on, for example, the third. And this is also pretty interesting because often in the highest levels the people basically shared a room. For sometimes even 16 people lived in the same apartment because it was just like they needed a cheap living place. They couldn't afford more because Rome was expensive as well. I mean, it was the capital basically for them of the whole world. And as you can imagine, fire was a big problem in Rome because many houses cramped together. There were quite some problems, and when they actually implemented the laws that restricted, like, here you can't build, you can only build that high, etc., this was already quite late. So it was a planned city. It was a planned city, absolutely. But there was already quite some crowded places, especially like the poorer places. When their fire broke out, it was very problematic because the Romans didn't really have like a professional firefighter. They had the Vigiles, for example. The Vigiles basically were like the night watch of Rome. They were basically kind of police, but they did also something like firefighting. So they were trained actually in firefighting, but they were not professionals. That was not their profession. Their profession was basically to keep the city safe and also to watch over people that come into the city and go out of the city. So the Vigiles were not really professional, even though they were trained at it. So what did they do if a fire broke out? Well, mostly they basically tried to eliminate the fire with buckets of water. They also had kind of fire mobiles, but this was more of the private people, because there were also private companies actually, well, companies, people that offered like a firefighter service. This is really interesting. There were businessmen that invested in that, and they had like a group of people that should firefight, that should kill the fires. What basically happened, if your house is burning, then these guys come, rushed in. Mostly they are the first there because they know, well, there could break a fire out, and they rush immediately there when there's actually a fire. And they tell you, yeah, you pay us that, therefore we will basically save your house. Because they actually do this negotiation while the fire is burning. So they are not first helping you and then you can pay, but no, they are really putting pressure on you, because if you don't pay, your house will break down. Well, if they couldn't eliminate the fire though, and it could actually be dangerous for many different buildings or even the whole city, like in the fire of Nero's time, well, then the Roman vigiles actually took drastic steps. For example, in firebreak they did. Basically, they pulled down entire buildings to basically create a gap where there's nothing burnable, and they tried to eliminate the fire like this and basically put it to a halt so that it doesn't spread more and more. This never really worked 100%. Sometimes it actually did work alright sometimes, but it was not in 100%. If they do that, the fire will stop. So for example, during Nero's regime, they did that at the Great Fire of Rome, and it didn't really work out well. In the end, it did work out, but the first few gaps got just like the fire spreaded more and more because of the wind. Obviously, the stronger the wind, the wider you have to make the gap. And they didn't manage to do that in time, because it's not that easy to actually destroy a whole building and get everything like firewood, etc. out of the way. That didn't work that fast. So they had there quite a problem. They implemented the gaps, worked not well, but in the end, through like a larger gap, and after I think 2 days it was, they could stop the fire from spreading through these gaps. So it was not like that the first gap immediately closed the fire down, but no, you needed more gaps until eventually the fire died down. So if we look at this Roman laws, we see something quite interesting. They actually did quite much to have kind of a safety for their houses, and also to stop fire from spreading. Because this was a huge problem, obviously, because you didn't just have the safety regulations like we today. They tried their best though to limit fires, and this worked quite well. There were often fires, but there was only very rare a fire that completely destroyed the city. Well, this is quite hard to destroy the whole city, but still, it happened during Nero, who we still don't know 100% who did it. Were it the Christians? Was it Nero himself, which many actually think he was because he built a golden palace after the fire? Who knows? Well, we can't say for 100%. Nero blames the Christians, and basically many people blame Nero. We don't know. We can think what we want, but maybe we will find out one day. Still, I hope you learned something from this video, and I hope you enjoyed it, and yeah, I wish you a good day.